Welcome to Transport Vlog. My name is Paul and this is another Chatswood dive site update. It's the 11th of October as I'm recording this, and this is shortly after a 7-day track work possession. So lots of work has happened. So what I'm going to do is show you some footage just before this work started, then show you some footage during the actual work from the Mowbray Road Bridge, and then show you what it looked like when it was all finished.
This was on the 1st of October on a train towards Chatswood. Coming up on the right is the Drake Street storage area, which has some sleepers which have been here for a few months now, along with portable lighting, steel pipes, portable toilets and ballast. And in position and ready for action are a variety of construction vehicles, with some sitting on fresh ballast. So as you can see, everything is ready for the 7-day track work possession, which will start on the 3rd of October. From here, nothing has changed since my last footage, which was on the 20th of September. This was in my previous update video, and if you haven't seen this, it's now appearing on the top right. Now this is where it gets interesting, with additional rails that will be used to connect the new track with the existing Metro Northwest tracks that are on the other side of this fence. Now in the other direction. This gap is only 5 metres long, and these sleepers, 62 in total, and these additional rails will be used to plug this gap. The good stuff is all covered up, but luckily I have some footage from a few days earlier. But before I show you that, notice some further rails that will be used to link the two lines together. And here is this earlier footage that was taken 5 days before on the 26th of September. You can see these brown metal prongs that are temporarily holding the rails in place. All the overhead wire stanchions and gantries have been in place for a few weeks now, but without the overhead wires. These are due to be added during this 7-day track work blockade. And now in view is the Northern Dive Site Services building. This is now on the 4th of October, so day 2 of this track work possession, and track and sleepers have already appeared for both lines, where the new ballasted track section will start. The majority of those 62 sleepers are now in place, except for 5 sitting on top of the northbound line and 1 for the southbound line. You can see the tracks for the existing Sydney Metro Northwest line on the other side, with a small gap between this and the new tracks. This vehicle is about to screw some holes in the ground for the future fence post supports, and down it goes. Remember those steel tubes that were in the Drake Street storage area? Well, these are now being moved into position. Most of these construction vehicles have special wheels to run on rails, along with rubber tracks or large tyres for use on gravel, soil or uneven ground. Time to deliver the tubes. If you have any ideas of what these tubes might be used for, then do share this in the comments below. I hope they're not fragile. This excavator on the northbound North Shore line is very active, so I headed over to this shared path to investigate. It's slightly north of where the tracks will join, but still has some interesting views. This fence has a clear plastic screen, so if you hear some squeaks, that's me moving my camera. Compared to the ballast immediately in front, this looks a little too dark for ballast, so I reckon this might have something to do with the new fencing or the drainage channels. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. You can't get much closer than that without wearing full PPE. This is now on the 6th of October, so day 4 of the shutdown, and it's been raining heavily for most of the day. It is a little hard to see what is happening, but it appears that all the sleepers are now in place. And you can now see overhead wires for the first time. At the moment it's just for the southbound line. And the 2 stanchions close to the northbound tunnel portal now have cantilevers. This is the northbound one, and now the southbound one, which is a little easier to see. Here is a closer view of the southbound cantilever, and you can see the overhead wires being put into position, and now being tightened to the correct tension. The stops on either side are for the future fence posts. These are known as footings. It's now early on the 8th of October, so day 6, and I really can't tell if the lines are connected or not. Fence posts have now appeared where the footings were 2 days earlier. Overhead wires have now started to appear for the northbound line, and 2 additional cables have appeared for the southbound line, making that 4 in total, which is standard for Sydney Metro, as you'll see if you watch this front of train video now appearing in the top right. As you can see, there is lots of work going on. Heavy rain was forecast for later in the day, so they're making the most of the dry weather. From the shared path you can see some workers grappling with a piece of the mesh fencing. It's definitely a two-person job, although you could try and lift it by yourself, but probably better to get some help. So it's now the 11th of October and the trains are running again. Hurrah! So it's time to discover the changes that couldn't be seen easily from the Mowbray Road Bridge. Here is a good view of the cantilever for the southbound line with the overhead wires attached to it. The new northbound cantilever is a little hidden by the fencing. All the remaining gaps in the fencing along the retaining walls have now been filled in, which does make it a little harder to see what's going on. So have the lines been connected? You're about to find out. Here is one of the two remaining concrete stumps that didn't have a purpose. It now does, with the ends of the overhead wires attached to it, and here is the other one. And here is the newly extended track, complete with ballast and sleepers, but does it go all the way? Well, sadly, no. There is still a gap, but we're now talking centimetres rather than metres. And with all that suspense, you probably didn't notice the new fencing, which is now connected to the fencing that went up a few weeks ago, and all the remaining gaps in this fencing have now been filled in. As this fencing creates a physical separation between the Sydney trains and Sydney Metro tracks, it will make it easier for one operator to have trackwork possessions without the other being affected. So for example, Sydney Metro trains could continue to run whilst the adjacent North Shore lines are closed for trackwork. There is a small gap in the fencing on the Albert Avenue Bridge as the tracks are already separated. This is in the same direction and on the same day, but with some different views of the overhead wires. The two lower wires that the pantograph will collect current from are known as contact wires, and the two wires above are known as messenger or catenary wires. Their purpose is to support the contact wires below. This cantilever on the right was installed during last week's shutdown. Notice how the overhead wires get higher as the track bed ascends to the surface. And the vertical supports on this gantry had all the remaining bits added during last week's shutdown too. The overhead wires currently finish at these next two stanchions, as you can see here. There is then a short gap with no overhead wires before the stanchions and overhead wires for the existing Sydney Metro North West line start. Now in the other direction, and the fencing starts immediately after Chatswood station except for the bridge, and then continues, and continues, and continues. But there is a small gap for this ground signal. I wonder if that will be moved. Along here, all the remaining gaps in the fencing have now been filled in, and from here the fencing is all new. The end of the existing southbound line is pretty easy to spot. A tamping machine will be required to compact the ballast into place, and this will probably have to come through the tunnel from the Sydenham end unless they connect the tracks first. On this concrete slab with the yellow panels, fastenings are now holding the track in place instead of the metal prongs. No further changes from here except for the additional fencing. Work is required to add the remaining fastenings on the southbound line from where this yellow vehicle is to the tunnel entrance. There are some workers just inside the northbound tunnel portal, possibly working on the overhead wires. And now you can see the wires and the additional structure for the southbound line. And this is how the services building is now looking from this side. And as this train goes under the Mowbray Road Bridge, here is some further footage from this bridge. With all the fencing now installed, I reckon most of the remaining work can now take place while North Shore Line trains are running. I don't think any work happened to add the remaining fastenings to the southbound track during this shutdown, so this will probably continue during the rest of October. The shutdown also allowed work to cover over the tunnel portal to progress much more rapidly. On the 26th of September it looked like this, with work continuing on the new walls, and you could still see a fair way down. Now on the 4th of October, and it didn't look like much had changed. However, by the 8th of October, part of the roof had appeared, which now covers the top of this wall. And by the 11th of October, the whole roof was in place, although with all these prongs on top, it looks like something else will go on top of this. From the train, you can still see some gaps before the dividing wall, but then it's all covered over. Now looking back towards the Northern Dive Site Services building. Most of the Northern Dive Site Services building now has this very subtle pink cladding, which was just starting 3 weeks earlier, and it continues to the north side of this building too. This is the acoustic shed, which is in the process of being demolished. And in case you're wondering, Mowbray House is still safe and sound. Now looking towards Artarmon, and the most obvious change is the installation of a level crossing pad adjacent to the Drake Street entrance. This will make it easier for construction vehicles to access this part of the rail corridor in the future.
So that's the end of this Chatswood dive site update video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, do give it a like, give it a thumbs up, do leave a comment or question below, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and also consider joining me on Patreon. One of the perks is that you get access to these videos 2 days before anyone else, and with something like Chatswood Dive Site, 2 days can make all the difference. So thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.